Live from Beijing, you're watching World Insight on CCTV News. I'm Wang Yizhi. And for more on this, we're now joined in our Beijing studio is Mr. Yuan Peng, Vice President of the China Institute of Contemporary International Relations. In Chicago, we're joined by Ms. Laura Schwartz, author and commentator. Ms. Schwartz worked for the Clinton administration for 8 years. And in Washington, D.C., we have Mr. Brandon Andrews, a former Senate staff. And here, let's talk about the State of the Union speech. Well, opinion polls shows that the speech went down well among American public. So, Laura, let me start with you. What's your general review of the speech?
Well, you know, as for Democrats, they loved it. As it was alluded to in the tape piece just a moment ago, State of the Unions are often rhetorical. They are exciting. They are inspiring. The president has the floor of the Congress for a good hour or hour and a half to talk about his campaign promises and what he's delivered. He's able to talk about the policies put forward and the policies he'd like to see as his lasting legacy. So many times these speeches have maybe a couple of nuggets that can get through in Congress and actually become law. Other points, as we saw last night, really are points that the Democrats love to hear. Again, it's really creating at this point, because there's not a campaign to be run by President Obama, it is now about monitoring his legacy. So inspirational, uplifting. The Democrats will love it. The Republicans, not so much. But when you look at State of the Unions from Republicans and Democrats alike over the last 15 years, many of them get positive response.
From the Republican point of view, Mr. Andrews, what's your take on this?
Well, I agree with Laura. I think that when this president is out of office, a significant part of his legacy will be his oratorical skills and his ability to deliver a message effectively in a way that few United States presidents have been able to. Something that I think that was perhaps missing from this speech was reaching out to, number one, young people, to those of us in the millennial generation that have bought into the hope and bought into the aspiration and have unfortunately lagged behind our peers in other generations when you look at unemployment, when you look at median income, etc. And then also, I think the president could have done a little bit more to reach out to Republicans in terms of being aspirational about the ability to work together and get things done over the next 2 years as he works with the 114th Congress. I think he laid out a plan that is his plan, his vision, and he talked a lot about things that he would do, but something that I think he hasn't done as much as perhaps he should have done in the past years is reaching out and using that phone to build relationships, and I think he missed an opportunity to start off the 114th Congress kind of on the right note there. But,
yeah,
but other than that,
we'll talk about the
differences
between the two parties later in the program. But next question goes to you, Mr. Yuan. So Obama has said that the American economy and foreign policies has turned another page into a new era, overturning all the turmoil in the past. Do you believe what he said?
I partially agree with that. In particular, it's American economy, and according to different estimations and calculations, last year American economic growth, according to GDP, almost 2.5 to 3%. It's an amazing number, in particular compared with European Japan, which is still in the very end timing of the crisis, and the comparison with some emerging markets, emerging countries, which economic growth is slowing down. So Americans' economic achievements under Obama's leadership is quite amazing. But however, why this economy recovering, and different economists give different answers. Some think maybe it's because of the energy reform, the shale gas revolution. Some others think maybe it's because of American dollar hegemony, because quantitative easy. So some others argue that this economic recovery is achieved without any substantial structural reform. So how long will this economic recovery last? Still not 100% confirmed. So we need another year of wait and see.
Another year of cooperation between the two sides? Because the scenario is different now. Both of the House of the Congress is now controlled by the Republicans, and also the Republicans are threatened to veto some of the Obama's policies. Will that affect decision-making process before we turn into the 2016 presidential election, Laura?
Well, I believe that, when you're in that chamber, you can easily talk over Congress to the American people, and I think Brendan really alluded to this. In that room, there are, I think, some 300 Republicans in front of him, and that will be the task at hand, in what pieces of legislation can be coordinated and actually get through, and other things that the Republicans want to repeal now that they're in charge of both houses of Congress, that he will veto and not allow them to do. So it'll be very interesting to see what happens in the next year that leads up to the 26th campaign, although the 2016 election for president will be, by and large, started by the end of this fall and really take on its own life. This very well may be the last State of the Union that people really listen to as far as seeing the Democratic agenda. But it's not about a Democratic agenda for the next year because of the power of the Republicans. And just as the doctor was alluding to in the studio, there's two sides to every story. There's two sides to every economy. There's a lot that they need to get to work on and roll up their sleeves to do, and that's where the American people are still skeptical.
And Republicans obviously don't like the tax the rich proposal. What's your take on this, Brandon?
Well, I think what Republicans are looking at is the president laying out several new programs that are going to cost a significant amount of money. And then you have to say, well, where do you get this money from? And it always seems to come from the same place in terms of the proposals raised by this president. So I think tax reform is something that both Republicans and Democrats want to do. It's one of the things that I think can actually get done in the 114th Congress, especially with this push by the president in the State of the Union. The Republicans and Democrats don't agree right now, but I think there is some potential for the two sides to kind of come together. Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa alluded to tax reform and talked about closing loopholes and talked about making sure that average Americans aren't burdened or encumbered by a difficult tax filing system. And so I think there are pieces and parts there that can come together and coalesce around a piece of legislation that can actually get passed, since there's will to do it both in the Republican-controlled Congress and at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue with the president.
Right. Usually the emphasis is on domestic economy or unemployment rate in the State of the Union address, but some analysis are often seeing the State of the Union address as a way to assess the administration's priorities and blind spot. Let's take a look. The foreign countries most mentioned by Obama in all his addresses since taking office were Afghanistan and Iran. And if you compare that with past presidents, you would see that Bush talked about Iraq the most. For Clinton, it was China. And for Bush Sr., Iraq came again as the top of the list. So while both Reagan and Carter put Soviet Union up front, I guess that reflects the changing threats America is facing. What's your take on the changing trend, Mr. Yuan?
Yeah, I agree with you that the main focus of the State of the Union speech is on domestic issue rather than the foreign policy. But this time, even if Obama's achievements on economic recovery was praised by American people and the Congress, but his foreign policy is highly criticized, especially by the GOP, the Republican. Particularly his Libya policy, his Iraqi, the ISIL is back, and even his relations with Russia. And so Obama spent many times talking about how he used his smart power strategy to deal with Libya, Iraqi, and Russia.
Yeah,
and how
Obama has pledged to use force to intervene into those foreign terrorists and international terrorism. Laura, do you think that proposal is going to pass through Congress?
Yes, I believe the Congress is open, as Brandon alluded to, maybe corporate tax loopholes and a few other things, including an authorization bill for the conflict against ISIL, wherever ISIL may be. The military leaders in America have argued that the over 1,900 bombings that have occurred in Syria and Iraq have been successful in damaging ISIL. It still has a long way to go to decimate, but by getting authorization from Congress, which I believe the Republicans and some Democrats will vote for, is going to help with the arming of the rebels, the vetting of the rebels, and deciding what equipment to send. And that this is a much larger issue than just airstrikes, which was brought up last fall, that the president could do on his own without seeking authorization from Congress. But as we've seen ISIL demonstrate, this is going to be a tough fight. And it's not only going to be in Syria and Iraq, though that's where we're going to take it, as well as wherever else it's needed around the world. That is something I believe that the Republicans will authorize, and quickly.
Yes, this is a fight that will last probably for generations. Well, my last question goes to you, Brandon. Is this going to be a legacy that's something that the Democrats will build on, or something that the Republicans can attack while running for the 2016 election?
Well, unfortunately, with the way the primary system is set up in the United States, folks on the Democratic side will run to the left, and folks on the Republican side will run to the right, and that means that attacks will come. And so I think the great thing about a State of the Union is that there's the opportunity to bring the nation together, to coalesce around some national priorities, and then an opportunity for the party in opposition, again, Senator Joni Ernst, to bring forth their priorities for the country to, again, coalesce around. And there were a lot of similarities. We talked about tax reform. We talked about the authorization for use of military force. We talked about, or something that we could talk about, is education. And we talked about workforce development and a few other things. These are national priorities and things that can be worked on by both parties. Now, the GOP in Congress has already started passing some pieces of legislation that are going to placate to the base out there. So attacking the president's health care bill, so attacking some of the immigration moves that the president has made. But once we get those things kind of out of the way, I think in the next couple of months, you'll start to see the Republican-controlled House and Senate pass some much more substantive pieces of legislation that actually stand a chance of passing, including the authorization for use of military force, including some changes on net neutrality and protecting free and open internet, and some changes on
Sometimes
tax reform
economic
and some
growth
other
can
things.
overshadow some of the loopholes in administration. And now American economy is really robust. And as the second largest economy, China is now facing a downward trend, downward pressure of its economy. So President Barack Obama mentioned China 3 times in his State of the Union address, 2 times for trade, and the other is for climate change. The final take on this, Mr. Yuan, how China weighs in America's economy and vice versa.
Yeah, in recent years, almost in every year's speech on the State of the Union, China was mentioned by President Obama. And this time, twice on trade. And very interesting this time, he specifically mentioned that Chinese want to ride economic rule in Asia Pacific. And the reason for that, I think, is for pushing the Congress to pass the Trade Promotion Authority so as to achieve the TPP and the TTIP negotiations with the European and other countries to becoming a legacy of Obama's policy. And one other is on climate change cooperation between U.S. and China in Beijing, which is a good thing for Obama to mention. I think objectively speaking, I think this time China was mentioned by Obama in a relatively objective way. It's not that bad, but still I think we need a more balanced view of China in the future U.S. and China relations.
Yeah, a new normal of foreign relations proposed by Chinese President Xi Jinping. Thank you, the 3 of you. That was Mr. Yuan Peng here in China, and Laura Schwartz in Chicago, and Brandon Andrews in Washington, D.C. Thank you.